Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. In this video, we will write the program to activate and deactivate the cube and the sphere game object. So basically, when the virtual button is pressed, the sphere will be visible, that is activated, and when the virtual button is released, the cube will be visible. So let's start with the programming. So first, I'll open the virtual button script. Inside the virtual button script, I'll first add the Vuforia namespace. So I'll write down using Vuforia. Next, neighboring to the monoBehavior class, I'll put a comma and then I'll write down iVirtualButton. Okay, so as you can see, I have just written iVirtual and I'm getting this option of iVirtualButton event handler, which is basically an interface. So I'll select the iVirtualButton event handler interface. And this iVirtualButton event handler interface basically consists of two functions called the on button pressed and the on button released, which we will be using inside a program. So below the void update function, I'll first declare the on button press function. So I'll write down public void on button pressed. And guys, as you can see in the on button pressed, the O, B and P is capital. So guys, please make sure that you keep the alphabets O, B and P capital. After this, inside the round brackets, I'll write down virtual button abstract behavior. I'll give this a variable name of VB. After this, I'll open and close curly brackets. So guys, the virtual button abstract behavior is a data type and it has a variable name of VB. And with the help of virtual button abstract behavior, we can find out the name of the virtual button which is pressed. Now currently, since we just have one virtual button, so we won't be using this virtual button abstract behavior data type. Now after declaring the on button press function, next I'll declare the on button release function. So I'll write down public void on button released. I'll then open and close round brackets. Inside this round bracket, I'll again write down virtual button abstract behavior. I'll also give this a variable name of VB. Next I'll open and close curly brackets. Okay. And guys, if you look over here, in the on button release spelling, the alphabets O, B and R are capital. Okay. So after declaring the on button pressed and the on button release function, next inside the virtual button script, I'll declare two variables of game object data type. So I'll write down public game object. I'll give the first variable a name of sphere go. So the GO is the short form for game object, and I'll give the second variable a name of cube go. And as you can see, I have made both these variables public so that we can see the sphere go and the cube go variables inside the inspector panel. Okay. So after declaring these two variables, next I'll refer the sphere game object to the sphere go variable and I'll give a reference of the cube game object to the cube go variable. So I'll save my script. After this, I'll minimize monodevelop. Next, I'll click on image target. And after this, if I scroll down inside the inspector panel, then as you can see, we have the sphere go and the cube go variables been shown over here. Currently, both of them are empty and we need to provide values in the form of game objects. So in place of sphere go, I'll drag my sphere game object, and in place of cube go, I'll drag my cube game object. Okay. So after giving a reference of the sphere to the sphere go game object and the cube to the cube go game object, next I'll declare and register my virtual button. So below the game object data type, I'll write down virtual button behavior. I'll give this a variable name of VRB. I'll put a semicolon. Okay. Next, inside the void start function, I'll write down VRB equal to get component in children. Okay. Now guys, please make sure that you select the get component in children option and not the get components in children. So I'll select the get component in children. After this, I'll open a corner bracket. And inside this corner bracket, I'll write down virtual button behavior. Okay. So I'll select the virtual button behavior option. I'll close the corner bracket and next I'll open and close round brackets. I'll then put a semicolon. Now guys, let me explain you this line of code. Okay, so I'll go inside the Unity editor and as you can see, the virtual button script is attached to the image target. Okay, but the virtual button prefab is a child of this image target. Okay, now if I click on the virtual button, then as you can see, to the virtual button, a component called as virtual button behavior is attached. So with this line of code, I'm accessing the virtual button behavior component, which is attached to the virtual button. And since the virtual button is a child of the image target, so that's why I have written get component in children. So after explaining this, next I'll write down vrb.register event handler. I'll then open and close round bracket, and inside this I'll write down this. Okay. So with this line of code, I'm basically registering my virtual button. Okay. Now after registering the virtual button, next I'll activate and deactivate the cube and the sphere game object. So basically inside the void start, I'll write down cube go dot set active to true. And below this, I'll write down sphere go dot set active to false. So guys, as you know, when the application starts, so during that time, the void start function is called. And when the void start function is called, so during that time, I'm activating the cube game object, that is the cube game object will be visible, and I'm deactivating the sphere game object. Now after activating and deactivating the cube and the sphere game object, next I'll go inside the on button press function, and inside this I'll write down cube go dot set active to false, and on the next line I'll write down sphere go dot set active to true. Next I'll copy this piece of code, that is I'll copy these two lines and I'll paste it inside the on button release function. I'll change the false to true and I'll change the true to false. Now guys, let me explain you what I've written inside these two functions. So basically when you press the virtual button, the on button press function will be called, and when this function is called, I am deactivating the cube game object, so the cube game object will be invisible, and I'm activating the sphere game object, so the sphere game object will be visible. Next, when the virtual button is released, with this line of code, that is cube go dot set active to true, I am activating the cube game object, that is the cube will be visible, and with this line of code, that is sphere go dot set active to false, I am deactivating the sphere game object, that is the sphere will be invisible. So guys, I basically finished with the code, so I'll click on Ctrl S to save the script. Next, I'll minimize monodevelop, and after this, I'll click on the play button to check the output. So I'll click on the play button, and as you can see, when the application starts, we are just seeing the cube game object, that is the cube game object is visible and the sphere game object is invisible. Next, I'll click on this virtual button. So guys, as you can see, when I clicked on the virtual button, the sphere game object is visible and the cube game object is invisible now. I'll just click on the virtual button a few more times. And as you can see, when I click on the virtual button, the sphere is visible. And when I release the virtual button, the cube is visible. So I'll come out of play mode. So guys, that's it from this video, and I hope from this video you would have understood the working of the virtual button. Okay. Now in the next video, we will build this app and we will run it inside our Android smartphone.